Mentor, and today's conversation is an exciting one. It's going to be kind of short. No, I take that back. It might not be short because I talk a lot, but it's basically jump training program versus sprint training program. Okay. A lot of coaches have this philosophy that all athletes should train as sprinters because their speed is ultimately what's needed in all events of track and field. If you're faster in the throwing rink, if you're faster on the runway, if you're faster on the track, you're going to be faster, right? That's true, 100%. What I'm going to do is talk about the differences between the training, why they're different, and just create this debate, right? Even though it's just me and the camera, right? So let's focus on why is having every athlete train as a sprinter. Like, why is that important? I'm going to put my mind around that concept, right? So let's say I have a sprint team to make it easy. I want to develop their speed so that they're able to run faster. So I'm going to do things like block starts. I'm going to do things like speed training, all those things, right? And we're going to see improvement. I'm also going to say, okay, I have a jumper that jumps 16 feet, a girl, and I want this girl to jump further. If I make them faster down the runway and get them stronger in the weight room, they're going to be able to produce more power and bring more speed down the runway to allow them to jump further. The Western world that we live in, or I do, is based around speed and power. Speed and power. Go to the weight room, develop our power, go to the track, enhance that speed or enhance that power to a higher frequency to allow us to run faster. That does make logical sense. It makes sense. And if I have a distance runner that does speed training with the sprinters once a week, and then they continue their distance training, they're going to have faster foot speed. Now they're going to have a better kick at the end of the race, right? If I take my throwers and I put them with my speed training group, they're going to get dead last every run, but they're going to be faster than any other throws group out there. If I have a pole vaulter and I work on speed training, they're going to have more speed down the runway, which allows them to generate more force with that actual pole, right? So many of these things fall into place, and this is right? Now, here's what I see. What I see is whenever I have sprinters, true sprinters that are like primary sprinters that come to the runway and that want to jump, the problem I always run into is that sprinter is not consistent on the board. And they're not consistent on the board because they're taught the second they start running, their job is to generate as much speed and force as they can. When it comes to long jump, you don't want to do that. You actually want to generate speed without having to exert your energy because you need to exert your energy at the board. You want to have your speed gradually build up from fast to faster on the runway and jump. But on the sprint side is yes, you're gradually going to build up fast to faster. However, the faster starting point you have, the faster end point you're going to have eventually. When it comes to jumps, you don't want to come out a like a rocket out the start because now what's going to happen is as you run down that runway, you're gradually going to slow down. And as you slow down, now you're expecting yourself to change your direction from linear to a vertical movement. And that requires another amount of power and force production that your body isn't ready for, right? Also, as you're sprinting, your sprint mechanics are in a certain way. As you reach top end speed, you're now running at a lifted hip position. When you're jumping, if you have a lifted hip position, the problem with that is you're now not in position to create a bent leg, right? So if you're standing straight up tall, you can't jump right now because in order to jump, you must bend your legs, which means you're going to go away from the height that you were to then generate force to push the ground away to send you back upwards. Now, when it comes to Sprints or jumps, if you're sprinting down the runway and you're on the balls of your feet and you're sprinting and you're in this position, you then don't have the ability to drop down and jump, which is why they teach the penultimate step. The penultimate step essentially is a way to lower your hips to be in position to where you land and your leg is bent to be able to jump that leg down or push the leg down, push the ground down with the leg to generate force to send you upwards to have your jump to transition from a linear to vertical angle, right? So in that process, as you're moving horizontally, you are generating a certain amount of force. Then when you do this drop of penultimate step, you're actually adding on a certain level of depth to your leg at takeoff. So now you're loading a weight onto that leg, then expecting that leg to generate the force to drive you back upwards, right? Also, as you're running faster, you have less time on the ground per step. Every single step that you take, you're trying to spend less time on the ground because you're getting through the ground faster. But when it comes to jumping, you're trying to produce a certain amount of force to jump further than that girl's mark of 16 feet. So as you are loading, then you're trying to jump. As you're running faster this way, you have less time. That window for you to produce the force is less. Now, as it's less, you now have to figure out how to create more force in less time because you have less time on the ground, and it becomes a problem because now that 16-foot jumper doesn't have the ability to produce 17 feet worth of force production in a fraction of the time on the ground. This equation is what's forgotten about. It's what's missed. So Kelly Golden was a 18-foot 7 long jumper. She's now like a superstar softball player at UCLA. And she was a true sprinter, right? But then Dominique Rutolo, who was not a sprinter, not the fastest athlete, she is now, but at that time she wasn't. She had a personal best of 19.2. Well, what's the difference when you had an athlete that was training as a sprinter? Why did the jumper who trained as a jumper have more power and force production? It's because we were able to develop that she was able to create more force within the time on ground. She ran slower, which gave her more time to produce the force. And she was strong enough to handle that, even though Kelly might have been pound for pound a stronger athlete, right? But when it comes to functional strength, Dami was actually more resilient when it came down to transmuting the energy from a negative to a positive or eccentric to concentric movement. Okay. And that comes from what? Bounding, plyometrics, jump training. When you are loading and deloading your muscles, it's like a band that's consistently pulling and tightening and stretching. That band is your elasticity. When you have an athlete who is more elastic, that athlete can produce more passive and more passive forces. So when you have a stretch reflex, okay, stretch reflex basically is like right now, if I'm pulling my hand back, the stretch reflex is my body allows a certain level of pull, right? So my forearm is pulling right now. When I pull it to a certain level, it says, okay, that's enough. We're good there. The further I get out of this comfort zone, it wants to return back to its neutral, natural state. So when I pull it back even harder, it then is going to trigger a stretch reflex which says, we won't allow you to pull that far. So now the body naturally pulls, it contracts. When I go back and naturally contracts, then I can actually piggyback off of that contraction and add to it as I go forward. And now my wrist flick is that much better. Okay. That same exact concept happens when you're running and jumping, which is why it's very important to have bigger arm swing, because now your arms exchanging dictates how quick your legs are going to exchange in natural range of motion. That's why your sprint coach says, I need an aggressive triple extension, arm swings big at the takeoff, because now you're exaggerating your motion, which then activates your stretch reflex, which you can piggyback off of to move faster. But when it comes to jumps, you need to have that same concept when it comes to loading your glutes, comes to loading your Achilles, loading your quads, activating your hamstring, all these things. Then when you have that activation going and you get stronger within the transition, stronger within the force production in less time, now you have a more dominant jumper. And if that jumper were to work on speed training, now you have a more dominant sprinter. Why? Because their elastic muscles are stronger. They're also quicker in transition. And that's exactly what you want as a sprinter. If you can jump higher as an athlete, you're going to have a better block start as long as you know how to use the blocks. So, what I'm getting at is this: if you have a true sprinter and you implement bounding and plyometrics into their training, you're going to have a better sprinter because they can produce more force. Okay. If you have a primary jumper, if you add in sprints, you're going to have a more productive jumper because that jumper has more speed. Back to the original concept, you want speed. Okay. So, what I'm getting at is don't train every athlete as a sprinter, train every athlete as a jumper. And then the secondary part of that is going to be sprinting, because now you're able to utilize that extra force production, extra power, extra resiliency, extra muscle stiffness and response time to running. That's my philosophy. If you have any type of debate with that, put that in the comment. Let me know, and I'll create another video just based off what you say. I'll do some more research because that's why I make these videos, is to have these conversations, and let's go from there. And if you also want, make your own video and let's have this conversation. And in the future, we can actually collaborate and have this conversation. So I'm a big believer on jump first, run second. And that's why our training program has been so successful. A little secret, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, is, believe it or not, but my program, the Lead Squad program, we don't do weight training. And yet, Ethan Fong gained 5 feet in 1 year. Anthony Victor gained 5 feet in 1 year. And I'm not talking about 5 feet as in they went from 37 feet to 42, right? I'm talking about 43 feet to 48. I'm talking about national level marks without touching weights. However, we did do a lot of plyometrics. We did do a lot of strength training without physically weights. That's a whole nother concept, but I do want to spark that conversation up for the future. Yeah. And another person that you'll be surprised is my brother, Keinan Briggs. His personal best is 26'11", right? 8 meters, 22. Weights, not there, right? Now, last year he did do weights, but that's a different story. Okay. But at the end of the day, he was consistently jumping and placed ninth in the US, again, with no weight training. It doesn't make any sense. Even when I was doing this program, it didn't make any sense, but it did when 4 of us were all ranked in the world and didn't touch a weight. But we did master our body's movement and our force production in a certain amount of time. It's crazy. All right. That's it for now. I'll talk to you guys.